Hello, everyone. It's Jim Alexander. I'm Executive Director of IPhO. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And on behalf of our IPhO National Fellows Council, the Professional Programming Committee, and really all of the 375 fellows in the National Fellows community, welcome. This is our first in a series this year of professional development webinars. As you know, it's focused on managing up. And these webinars are designed to help you enhance your performance in your fellowship program now and then beyond, hopefully, into your career. I'm just doing the introduction and kind of the conclusion tonight. I'll be back at the end to moderate the Q&A session, which I'll just give you a little reminder now. We're not going to use the chat function as much, but if you look at the upper left-hand portion of your screen by the meeting burner logo, you'll see a question mark and an ask a question. So please, for our speaker and the rest of the group here that's participating tonight, go ahead and enter your questions there, and we'll get to them at the end. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. April Naegeli. She's a senior research scientist with Eli Lilly, as you see on your screen there. She's not a pharmacist, which I think is better. It's, I think, better for us as pharmacists and fellows to hear, from people with different backgrounds and training. She is alumna, of the Visiting Scientist Program at Eli Lilly, and again, currently working there at Lilly. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Naegeli. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'm gonna turn it over to you now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jim, and also thank you to IPhO and the National Fellows Council, especially Aria, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you tonight to share some experiences that hopefully you can learn from, and also a few best practices for developing valuable working relationships with your fellowship preceptors, managers, and senior leaders. So again, my name is April Naegeli. I'm a senior research scientist in our Global Health Outcomes and Real-World Evidence function here at Lilly. I do have my doctorate and Master's of Public Health and Epidemiology from Johns Hopkins University. So I've been with Lilly for 12 years, and I was a fellow in our Visiting Scientist Fellowship Program here back in 2007. I was in regulatory affairs at that time, and it was a great opportunity and a very different experience for me because one thing I really learned from that was that I'm a scientist. And so while I really learned a lot about the regulatory space and how you develop drugs, I also learned that, health outcomes was where I wanted to be. So hopefully during this time in your fellowship, you're really taking the time to reflect on what it is you want to do, what your passion is, and hopefully that will lead you to your next endeavor after your fellowship. So I can't believe it, but it's almost been 20 years ago I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana, West Africa. There I taught science in a small rural village, and it was really then that, reflecting back, that I could see, my passion for public health really began to grow. So it really helped influence and make me into the person I am today. So Jim, if you could go to the next slide, please. So for full disclosure, the views and opinions expressed in the slides are those of my own and do not reflect those of Eli Lilly and Company. The focus of the discussion tonight will be on some tactics and tips to include in your toolbox for managing up. This is not a how-to presentation, but rather my sharing of what I have learned. Managing up is also referred to in literature as a process, of consciously working with your boss to obtain the best possible results for you, for your boss, and your organization. So as you're beginning your careers, you'll realize that that having a healthy, positive relationship with your manager is truly essential for success and job satisfaction. One of the best ways to help get you promoted or to land that high visibility project is to really make your manager look good. And it's not one of these maybe referred to as fucking up or anything like that, but really managing up is something that can help you be successful, while poor managing of your manager can also lead to misunderstanding of expectations, wasted time for everybody, and misalignment with organizational goals. So really it is on you, your responsibility to make the relationship with your preceptor or your boss and senior leaders who hopefully you're networking with to make that relationship really work. Only you can own it and make it what it will become. So as Jim mentioned, please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the discussion. We'll be collecting those. In today's world, with all the social media and technology capabilities, it seems that all we do is communicate, sometimes over-communicating. But really, don't underestimate the power of effective communication in any situation. And do not assume that you necessarily know how to do it in every situation. First and foremost, you need to understand your own communication style. And then in order to make the relationship with your boss or manager work, you will need to understand their communication style and then adapt your style accordingly to theirs. So let's begin with a little bit about communication. So Jim, next slide, please. So I'm sure you've all experienced that the pharmaceutical industry is a very complex work environment. People get pulled in many directions. You maybe are supposed to be at a meeting, but someone stops by and wants to talk about a very important research question. And you could probably have you could be triple booked for a certain time period. So it is most likely that your preceptor or manager have many direct reports and they have many ongoing projects. It could even be that your boss lives in a different state or even a different country. So for communication to be effective communication, it needs to be two-way. What I mean is not only do you need to communicate well with your boss, but you also need to be an enabler. You need to make it easy for your boss to communicate to you as well. So thinking about some ways that I've done this and maybe how you could approach this is, first of all, don't assume that you already know how to communicate with your boss. It is very important to understand your boss's management style because every boss is very different. I know here at Lilly, in the past several years, I've gone through 3 bosses. So it has taken, you need to take time and understand how each individual likes to do things and how they like to receive things. So we're not going to go into specifics about management style here. There's many books out there on determining, your boss's management style and then how you can work best with those approaches. So hopefully you'll tackle that in another webinar session. But to build a good relationship and determine how to best work with your boss, it's important to understand her goals her strengths, her weaknesses, their priorities, and their problems. So you may be thinking, well, how do I find that out? Do I just ask them? Again, I would recommend having that as another discussion, because that too is very important process and a very important skill to learn as you are early in your career. So additionally, what form of communication style is your boss most comfortable with, both in how they give and how they receive? So do they like to talk person to person over the phone, or do they use email or text message? Whatever the case is, when you are communicating, be succinct. If your boss wants to go into the details, they will ask for the details. As you begin to build your relationships and learn what it is that your boss wants, you can proactively, if your boss wants the details, then you can change your style and adapt and provide the details next time. Additionally, I think it's very important to be an active listener, which is also another topic for another webinar. But ask questions and summarize what you think you heard your manager say. A thing that I always like to do is follow up with summary emails. I could provide examples, but one reason that I do that is because it provides a good source of documentation that you and your boss have aligned on what expectations are, not only for you, but for them as well. So this will help you to build trust and a mutual understanding amongst the two of you. Next slide, please. So several years ago, I had a really great opportunity to present at an advisory board meeting where we were talking with thought leaders. We were walking them through our regulatory strategy for a drug that was in phase 3 development. So going into the meeting, we were provided with expectations for what our presentation should be like and a list of the attendees. The meeting was framed as that it was going to be an informal discussion with thought leaders, and so we could really be candid and talk with them. So when it came time for the meeting, I and several of my colleagues did our presentation, and we led a very engaging discussion with the group. So when we left the meeting, everyone was happy, high-fiving, and we really felt like we got good, constructive feedback on our strategy, and we could formulate some modifications based on what the thought leaders were telling us. So subsequent to the meeting, I looped back with my supervisor and provided him our perspective on how the meeting went, and went home feeling really good. The next day, though, to our surprise, we learned that the vice president of our function, well, not our function, but a function, who we originally did not anticipate or know that this person was going to be at the meeting, was pretty outraged and disappointed with how the meeting went and felt that our discussion was out of control and we didn't know what we were doing with respect to our strategy. So in essence, a bomb went off and we were now in damage control mode. So several points here is, one, do not do this. Not a very pleasant experience to go through. But really, two, what happened was the vice president went straight to our boss and provided this feedback, did not provide any feedback to us as the presenters. So it was a huge surprise to our boss and a very big contradiction from what we were relaying to him. So first and foremost, know who your audience is going to be. And then right before the meeting, confirm who your audience is going to be. We aligned on what the expectations were, but, we were only aligned with and prepared for having an informal discussion with thought leaders. So I would say always be over-prepared and always plan as if your vice president is going to be in the room, even if they're not supposed to be there. Because in the end, our scenario, our situation worked out, and we proved that we were competent. But it was really a painful experience, and one that I hope you don't have to go through. So always keep your boss in the loop, and establish a regular cadence of communication. So if your boss is too busy to meet, don't take it personally, but still keep them updated. Have a backup plan. What are alternative methods? If they like to do face-to-face, but in this situation you want to send them an email, send them an email, because you can always follow up with them. If you know that they're walking to a meeting, walk with them to the meeting and update them. If they are between meetings and going to grab some coffee, walk with them and get some coffee. Find time for lunch with them. Although in my experience, this is difficult because everyone eats at meetings, but, whatever method that you find works, use it and keep them updated. No surprises. And really, that should go both ways. Next slide, please. Another thing that I've learned through the years is be proactive and anticipate your boss's needs before he even knows they exist. And this will really help distinguish you as a valuable resource. Projects won't always go as expected. So when keeping your boss in the loop, as we just talked about, go to them not with answers as to why something is going a certain way, but also bring them solutions. Provide them with options. Articulate the benefits. What are the risks? What are some trade-offs? Help them be prepared for discussions with their boss. In the end, both of you will look great. So another thing is, even though you may not have communicated issues, someone else is probably communicating those issues, and they're probably going to your boss's boss. And so it's better to kind of prep your boss for when his boss comes to him. So next slide, please. Lastly, effective communication really comes down to how you are perceived, not how you think you're perceived. So, be honest, be a trustworthy employee, and be committed to doing the job at hand. Really own your work and be your authentic self. It really takes a long time to build credibility, but it's true. It really just takes a second to destroy your credibility. So, listen to your mother and always do the right thing. So with that, I'll say next slide. And also just before we proceed, just remind you to please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the discussion. Shortly we will open that up and have a back and forth. So next slide, please. So we've discussed a bit about communication, and a lot of what it takes to develop effective communication is really grounded in understanding. So we've talked about, it's important when you're understanding what your manager's style is, understand what their workload is. What are their priorities? What are their problems? Their strengths and their weaknesses. This will help you to identify with what your boss is going through and help you to understand how and when to best communicate with them. Next slide, please. Again, understand your manager's communication style. Align your style, with how they like to receive and give communication. If they prefer a daily report or a weekly report, do that. Stick with that. And never, never assume that you know what they want. And one thing that I, too, sometimes do, if it's a really important communication, is to have a colleague, a friend, someone that you trust, read over let's say your email. Make sure that the message you want to send to your boss is really being projected in that email. So next slide, please. So understanding strengths and weaknesses. It's important to understand your own strengths and weaknesses, but also part of understanding your boss's management style is getting at what skills they're really good at, and then the ones where they may need to focus work, improving those on. That's your opportunity to step in and provide them with that additional support so that their weaknesses don't necessarily seem or are perceived as weaknesses, but you're helping to build them up. So use your strengths to help your boss. And then, for example, if your boss doesn't like to develop PowerPoint slides, but you love to do that, volunteer, build slides, get speaking notes for them. Be a valuable source that they can depend upon and go to help make a win-win situation for everyone. Next slide, please. Understanding your manager's idiosyncrasies. Can you click? All right. So no matter how tempted you may be, don't do it. I unfortunately witnessed a colleague of mine create a situation during a staff meeting which is a very large staff meeting, probably about 30 people on the phone and in the room. But she really created a situation for our senior director where she knew that the senior director likes to have alignment across senior leaders. So that one voice, one message is portrayed when speaking to the rest of the staff. Well, this individual didn't abide by those rules and really just blurted out, how she was feeling, and you could tell on our director's face that this was not acceptable, and he was not happy. However, he took the high road and waited until after the meeting was over to deal with the situation. My advice is be respectful, don't be an ass, and don't antagonize your boss as you might do a family member. If you unintentionally happen to do this, please address it immediately and apologize, and work through the situation together to keep that trust and build a better relationship. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you've all heard that feedback is a gift. It is great when it's spontaneous and authentic, but as you may soon realize, people are often not comfortable providing feedback or even receiving feedback. So again, it's very important to understand your boss and your boss's management style, as well as your colleagues. So understand how they like to give feedback as well as how they like to receive feedback. When you receive feedback, take it according to the situation at hand. Sometimes, people will just provide feedback just to be talking, even if the feedback isn't a valid perception. So it's important to ask for examples and be constructive. Make it constructive so that you can take away ideas for developing and improving upon these situations. It's most important, though, to leave emotions out of giving and receiving feedback. Don't take things personally, but remember it's about the situation. An example of when I was a fellow many years ago, I was having a one-on-one with the vice president of the regulatory function. So it was the vice president was she was the sponsor of the fellowship program as well. So I really held her to high esteem and respected what she thought. So in our one-on-one, she happened to mention that, and this is my perception of how the meeting went, was I needed to be doing more. So after she had said that, I couldn't think about anything else that she was saying or what I was saying, and I was just thinking about, oh my God, what more could I be doing? So I immediately, after the one-on-one, I ran to my desk and ran to my preceptor and was talking about it, and he tried to, frame it in a way that was realistic and put things into perspective, but still, I didn't appreciate that, and so I kind of freaked out, and not that I'm a freaking out type of a person, if you know me, but, it really, I wasn't prepared, I guess, to hear something that someone I looked up to that really had no idea about what I was doing or, what work was going on, who really was just talking to talk. So really, think about the situation and ask questions and get something constructive out that you can take and develop upon. Next slide, please. As you are beginning your career, one of the most important skills to master is developing and managing valuable working relationships with your fellowship preceptors, managers, and senior leaders. Managing up is an ongoing process that really requires great care and attention. We've really only touched on communication and understanding, and there's so much more to managing up, but it's an ongoing process. And in order for you to get the attention and support that you need to succeed, especially in your fellowship year, you need to take the responsibility for developing and maintaining these relationships. You all have great futures ahead of you, so really start now and take charge and be authentic. So really, I will stop there, and thank you again for the opportunity and for your time tonight. I look forward to seeing what questions or comments that you might have. And also, if you have any stories or other tips that you'd like to share, please enter those as well. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in here, and let's see. First one is, do you feel that if you were constantly updating your mentor or manager, would they feel annoyed by that?
That's a really great question. So again, you need to understand and get a really good vibe as to what your manager prefers. And you can talk to colleagues, people that have known your boss previously, asking them what really works best, what they've seen work best. So if your boss is a person that likes to constantly be updated, then they won't find it annoying. If your boss isn't that type of person, then really it is, talk to your boss, understand what they prefer. I think it's a fellowship or starting a new position. It's good to even have that conversation. What is expected of you, and lay out what you kind of expect of them as well.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Naegeli. Another question about, and I think you touched on this a little bit, we're all busy and it's really tough to break through the clutter sometimes, and you mentioned maybe following them to the meeting or taking them to lunch, but there's a question about, how do you get through? How do you ask your questions to a really busy manager? And, their door might be closed, they're running the meetings, and then, there's, you have email, but they have a mound of email to go through, so when you need answers, you need to connect with them. What are a couple of other strategies you've used that have been successful?
So again, in kind of that understanding piece and laying down some expectations is, I guess I've been lucky to have supervisors that outright told me the best way to get my attention is to text me. So I find that sometimes if I really need something urgent, I will send my email. Also, I will send them a text to say, hey, check your email. I need a response. Also, most managers have a administrative assistant. Go to those people because really they manage the lives of the leaders. So having that person as an advocate for you to put your need in front of the supervisor is another way to get it the attention that you may need. And Aria or Jim, if you have any other advice or ideas in your experience?
No, I think I don't know. I might have added the take your boss to lunch line on the slide there, or somebody, had read my mind, because I used to do that when you couldn't get them. Nowadays, I don't know. It's really hard to get their time. You have to find a way. Mm-hmm. Don't follow them to their car. That's all.
Don't stop them.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, here's another one. Maybe you can rewind to the days when you were a fellow. And earlier you were talking about being proactive in understanding issues or problems. But hey, as a fellow, you're still new and you kind of don't know what you don't know. Can you give a couple of examples about how when you were proactive, either recently or when you were a fellow, what that was and how it worked for you? In anticipating or understanding, issues or problems that your boss facing.
Yeah. That's a great question. You're making me go back many years. So I guess one thing that this is a more recent experience, is we're taking a drug through what we call commercial decisions. So because most of us are, we sit on teams, or you have a specific role that you play, so you are an expert in that role, right? So in the role that I am in now, I'm in charge of the health outcome strategy for a particular drug. So in coming up with our phase 3 plans and beyond, so submission, commercialization, and so forth, you have to, you're working with a team, and so at the same time, you're updating your boss as to how things are going, what the major milestones are, and you have to, in a way, you'll find out that you're seen as the expert in that role, even though you may not be the expert. You're seen as that person. So really, you are in those discussions. You know what you say. You know how the team responds to that, and you know what the final decision is. So, for example, my recommendation was a certain direction. However, the team decided to take a different direction. So it was my responsibility then to document these differences, the discordance between our proposals, but then also get on board with the proposal that went forward. So I needed to be proactively to communicate the situation to my boss, because knowing that this plan that the team agreed upon was going to go to executives. It's going to be discussed with executives. So I knew that my boss's boss's boss was going to be a receiver of all of this information. So I wanted them to know what the discussions were at the team level, so that they understood from a health outcomes perspective where we're coming from, but then how the team came to that decision to go a different direction. So I know that was a very convoluted and very vague response, but it's something that I didn't want to catch my boss's boss off guard. So, and maybe it's just through experience that I knew to do that, but, if there's something that makes you uncomfortable, then, it probably is something you need to communicate with your boss, because eventually it will come back around and come back to you. So.
I have one other thing to add to that, which is, it's not like you're going to ask this question of the senior VP, but of your direct preceptor or your manager. Certainly you have time to do this. Heading into any meeting where you have a question in your mind about, what's this meeting about? Hey, I'm new. You can ask them, before going in, what would a good outcome from this meeting look like? And then they're going to tell you, first month or two, first month as a fellow, you're not doing a ton of contributing at meetings or listening, but by this stage, October, November, if you're in your first year, or certainly in your second year, you're a real contributor at these things. And you don't want to, you want to be consistent with how your manager is looking at the meeting and what a successful outcome would be. Just asking simple questions like that, I think, can help, can help what to expect in the meeting, and then, how to perform in that environment. Let's see. How about an annual review, or hopefully most of the fellows here April are going to get maybe an every 6-month review or at the end of the year. But when you're meeting with your manager for an annual review, what kind of points or message do you want to try to emphasize?
Well, I think it's very important to at first talk about what you originally agreed upon as your expectation. What were those original goals that you agreed upon and aligned upon? So addressing those, making sure that you've met your expectations, but then really, what are the impacts or potential impacts to the business? If there's certain projects that you're working on or milestones that you've hit, it really comes down to not just checking a box that you performed a task, but rather what's the meaningful outcome of those projects, for example. Also, I think it's important to discuss what did you learn through experiencing these projects. Was there anything that unexpectedly happened that maybe you had to deal with? Because that can be a very positive thing and you can learn from those situations and makes you better prepared for the next time. So those are important things to discuss, as well as are there any tasks or situation that has come up that, looking back, maybe there was a certain way that maybe you could have improved upon and had a better outcome. So I think it's really good to bring those up proactively and talk about those to get a different perspective, the perspective of your boss as well. If you received any positive or negative feedback, that's really great to share at your annual review. But, even throughout the year, you should be sharing that with your boss. Because when you get to your review, nothing should be new or surprising to your boss. It should really be a summary. And you should really just kind of talk about for example, what are the 3 most important things that you accomplished or you're proud of for the year? What top 3 areas do you want to work on next year? So I think really an annual review should be the time when you're just wrapping up what you've already been discussing the whole year and looking to what's next year.
Okay, good one. There's a couple of tricky ones. This will be fun. And this happens all the time. I'm sure you've seen it many times, but you're working on a project with other colleagues and there's somebody who's not pulling their weight, and, at what point do you discuss that with your manager versus giving that person direct feedback, and how do you bring it up?
That's a very relevant and great question. So thank you for asking that question. I have had different experiences in this area. One example didn't turn out so well for me, but there was a situation where we had a colleague that wasn't pulling their weight, and so it was really, I went to my boss not as a tattletelling per se, but as a colleague, I was seeking feedback on how I could improve myself to deal with the situation. How should I approach this person? So I went to my boss for coaching. And it wasn't necessarily that I called out my colleague or said who it was, but, I framed it as, here's the situation. Here's how I think I should go about doing that. What do you see as maybe pitfalls of doing that, or would you do anything differently? So that's one way I've addressed it. And then that allowed me to constructively go back to my colleague, but at the same time, I was keeping my boss in the loop. and as I said, in the end, it didn't work out well for me, but hey. Another way is if you have a colleague that isn't pulling their weight, it's the same situation. Maybe it's not managing up, but managing down. And so, again, understanding what they're going through, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and trying to help them in a similar way that you would help your boss.
That is a tricky one. I don't know that I have a lot to add to that one. I mean, if it's a skill set that you have, sometimes as a fellow, by filling in a void like that, people will recognize that you did the work. But if you're in medical and somebody else is in regulatory and you're not technically sound, you could quickly get out of your depth. And I mean, the last thing you want to do is publicly emphasize to coworkers that, in a manner that makes it obvious that the person was poorly performing, just so that you can look good. That won't help you either. So it's a pretty tricky situation for sure. I actually, I'm sad that it didn't work out for you, April, in that instance, but that was really good advice, I think, which is to go to your manager and ask them how to handle certain situations. Don't go to HR.
No. No.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure I know what this one is. It's probably going to be our last one, but I'm going to read it verbatim, and then the person who asked it, if they have to add a follow-up, please do. But how would you approach the discussion with your boss regarding transitioning from a fellow to a manager? I'm going to read that as, hey, I might be nearing the end of my program soon, and, I want to start the conversation around full-time work. How did that work for you, April? And if not, maybe, I might be able to fill in some of the blanks with things and experiences that I've had.
Okay, so the question is, how do you?
I'm interpreting this as, how do you approach, the discussion around what full-time job might be available to me at the end of my program? Probably just a little bit early for most people who are in their final year to have that. If I'm asking a different question than this question asker had, please submit another one. But that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, well, I think everyone should be on the same page that it is a fellowship. So there's a limited time frame around it, and inevitably you will get to the end of that fellowship, and so, you're going to need to move on and advance and become a professional. So hopefully the fellowship is providing you with those opportunities to have those discussions throughout your fellowship. If not, I think it's a good conversation to have with your boss now, because it's just reality that you're going to need to move on. But be mindful that you have responsibilities to do in your fellowship, and you are obligated to do those. So I think it's just worth bringing it up and keeping it at the forefront. Just as your performance annual review, there should be no surprises there. So hopefully this is something that is a continual conversation.
I'd resist the urge to bring it up too early. I think April was hinting at that. This is too early for sure, October. I mean, some people, their programs end next June 30th. So I think what would be fair game, though, is just to ask, like, in a disarming way, you just say, hey, don't interpret this as I'm looking to leave. I got work to do. I want to continue learning. I want to, run out my fellowship training as far as I can. But just in your mind, what would be a good time, down the road for us to start discussing that? If it's, 4 months before the end of the program, 2 months, 6 months, and get the manager's view on that. And then at least they start thinking about it, but yet you don't really start talking about it, especially at this stage. It needs to be, a little bit later. Now, for some of you who will be, soon recruiting your replacement, you start realizing, hey, I'm going to get kicked out of my chair here in the not too distant future. What about me? So it's normal to start thinking about that at this time, but there's not a lot to do just yet. And, I'd wait a bit of time before even asking what the right time is. I think we're approaching, 7 o'clock here Eastern time, so we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to really sincerely thank Dr. Naegeli. April, that was terrific. Thanks for sharing those experiences so that we can all learn from some of the things you did well and some of the things you'd like to do over again if you had the chance. I thought that was really terrific. So many, many thanks to you for the prep you put into it and for just sharing openly and honestly, with us. And then just to everyone, thanks for joining tonight. We'll be working on the next webinar. We'll let you know what that is. But again, on behalf of IPHO and the National Fellows Council and our Professional Programming Committee in particular, thanks to Dr. Naegeli and to all of you for joining tonight. So good night for now until the next time, and we look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you.